Hi ladies, join me today as we discuss the fifth period of Bible history known as the Wandering Period. Before we begin today, I want to answer a few questions that I've been asked last week or two. For those of you who have been following since the beginning of these studies, you will know this, but just within the last couple of weeks, I've had someone ask me some questions, and I want to make sure that if you were coming into this study in the middle, maybe you saw someone shared one of these on Facebook, I just want to give a little bit of information to maybe make you aware of some things that you might or may not be aware of yet. The first thing is that we have been hosting, these videos are hosted on YouTube. You can find them. I share that YouTube link on Facebook, but I also share these on Instagram. Now, if you want to have a worksheet, I have worksheets that I make. They're just very simple worksheets with an outline and a couple of links sometimes and a chart, maybe on the last one that I put on the worksheet for us. And it's just a way you can take notes. It's a way you can go in deeper study by reading an article about something that relates to that period of Bible history that we're talking about. And so if you look on the description on the video, each video in the description, there is a link to, I think it's called the resource page. And if you're watching it on Instagram, you can go up to my bio and you'll see a link that's for Linktree. And both of those will take you to a place where you can open up a folder of these worksheets that they'll be labeled the 15 periods of Bible study. You can see I try to label them by episode, so they are in order that way. Also, in each one, there's of the worksheets, there's a title for that particular lesson that we're on. I know that there's sometimes we have part 1 and part 2. That'll be the case this particular time of Bible history. And so it's just important, to keep up with the episode number and the title of each particular period of history. I just want to let maybe pass that along. Sometimes I haven't mentioned it in a couple of weeks, and I took 2 or 3 weeks off for the holidays. And if this is something for the new year you're wanting to study, you have more than enough time. I only do these once a week, so really you could have no time to be caught up. The videos themselves are shorter. I'm still trying to find that sweet spot of exactly how long they need to be. And also, I'd like to add this. If I am welcoming any kind of comment on the video or on Instagram, I really wanted this to be more of a engaging type of Bible study. So, if you have a question or a thought about it, please feel free to do that. Please feel free to share. If you know about social media, it's all about the likes and the shares. And that just helps things be seen more. So it's really good to share things like that and and maybe make a comment. I would be so thankful if you would do that. If you subscribe on YouTube or follow me on Instagram, that way you don't miss the Bible lessons each week. And I just want to talk about that before we get into our lesson today. So let's discuss this fifth period of Bible history, known as the Wandering Period. This period begins right after the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea. When we left them before, they had just left Egypt. They were running from Pharaoh's army, and they crossed the Red Sea into safety as Pharaoh's army was drowned in the Red Sea after God had parted it for them. And so it begins there. It takes about 40 years, a little over 40 years for this time period, actually, though. But so far, we've only talked about 2 books of the Bible, really 1.5. And so now we're getting into a time which is a short period of time, but many pages of our Bible are taking place here. You can read about it in Exodus chapters 15 through 40. Also, Leviticus would be in this time period, but this is the law. It's a record of the law that God's going to give them, which we'll speak of later. in the book of Numbers. Basically, it's a book of Numbers. It's a census that they take before this time period, or at the beginning of it, and then one they do a census again at the end of this time period. And there's also some more events of history that are put into the book of Numbers that we can read about. And then Deuteronomy would be included into this time period because it is the second time the law is given. It's we'll talk about this in a moment, but Moses is given this law, but by the time the end of this period, one generation has passed on, and he is repeating the law and giving it again and reminding the new generation of the laws of God. And then also Joshua chapters 1-3 are the end of this period that we call the wandering period. So when the Israelites left Egypt, normally if they would have just marched straight in, they were on their way to this promised land. You remember the promise of God to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and to Joseph, and then even to Moses at the burning bush in Exodus chapter 3, verse 8. I won't read that, except that he is telling Moses, even repeating that promise to Moses and saying that I'm going to give you these people, the land of the Canaanites and the land of the Hittites and the Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. If you study through this period of Bible history, you're going to read about that God's doing this, not because he's just a cruel God and doesn't care about the people who are living presently in that land, but the reason he's doing that is a form of punishment. These people are not following God. You know that since creation was a universal law of God to follow. We know that just by inference because they understood the need for sacrifices. They understood the clean and difference between clean and unclean animals. They knew certain moral laws. In the book of Job, which takes place earlier than the law of Moses, he knows about moral laws and how to act and how to be. And so we know that there are people who know about this universal law because of the patriarchal period that we've talked about. Not the patriarchal period of history, but that patriarchal dispensation, I should have said, that where the fathers are told by God how to live and what to do. But this is different. God has always expected people to obey him, and now he has these people, those that I just read about, the Hittites and Canaanites and the rest of them, they're not following him anymore, and they've abandoned God, and it's an abomination to him, some of their worship practices. So he's punishing them by sending them out. The Israelites are supposed to go there, take the land over, send the people out. We'll talk more about that later in a couple of weeks. But so it would have taken them about 2 weeks to go straight there. They don't go straight there, though. We can read about after 3 days, there's probably over 1 million people traveling, but they run out of water. We have those Bible stories about God providing water from the rock. We also, after about 45 days, they run out of food. They're complaining when they run out of food and water, of course. God provides it for them, but I wanted to mention really quick before we move on. I think about that sometimes, and about God teaching them right away that they needed to depend on him. He knew going into this land to defeat these people was not going to be easy, and there was no way they were going to do it. They had to rely on God to do it. And already, right away, when they leave Egypt, he's trying to show them, you have to depend on me for anything. And so even for things that we take for granted sometimes, like food and water, God is showing them that they need to depend on him for those provisions. And I think it's a very beautiful thing. Sometimes it's a hard lesson for us to learn, but it's definitely a lesson we can learn from this period of history. Now, this family of Israel, they've grown into a mighty nation like God promised they would. And they are they've crossed the Red Sea, and now it's time. Remember back a few weeks ago, we talked about a nation needing not just people, but a law and a land. God's giving them the land. They're on their way to the land. They're already a great people, but they need a law to live by, and this is what we're going to talk about now. They come to Mount Sinai about 3 months after leaving Egypt. And Sinai is also known as Mount Horeb, and it's where Moses encountered God at the burning bush. So it's an interesting fact. Most people think it's the same place. And he gives them a law to live by. This law is going to apply to every aspect of their life. There are religious laws, there's social laws and medicinal laws, and also civil laws. So in every way that they can imagine, God is telling them how they ought to live. And ironically, as God's giving them a law to live by, they're down making a golden calf. They get restless after Moses has been up on the mountain for about 40 days. And Aaron makes a golden calf and says, "This is the God that brought you out of Egypt." 3 months. That's how long it took. But probably it's because that's what they knew. They had seen so many Egyptians worshiping God. It's a good lesson about how your society influences you and the dangers of that. And it's no wonder that the very first law that God's going to give the people to live by is that they should have no gods besides him. And also that the second law is to not make a graven image to worship. So that's something he is wanting them to learn right off the bat. And the first 10 laws are what we know as the 10 commandments, but there were over 600 laws that had to do with every aspect of their life. A large part of the law had to do with the tabernacle. The tabernacle was, there were specific instructions about how to build this. It was going to be a place of worship. It was a tent. That's what tabernacle means. It's designed to be able to be taken down, put back up, moved around. And so they're going to build this and gather the supplies exactly the way God said and build it exactly the way he said. And you'll read about the tabernacle for centuries after this, and to the time of David, to the time right after David. So this is where they're going to worship God. Actually, it's where God says he's going to reside. I'm going to have a chart of the tabernacle, the things included in the tabernacle, because you'll read about these things like the Ark of the Covenant, the altar, the table of showbread, all of those things and more are referred to as you read through the Old Testament. So it's important to kind of know and understand what these places, what they were, what the purpose was. So please look at that chart and read about that. Another big part of the law was how had to do with the priesthood. The priests were from the tribe of Levi. Moses and Aaron were Levites. Those were that tribe, that son of Jacob that we talked, one of the 12 sons. That tribe is going to be given the responsibility of worship, leading the worship for the people. And more specifically, the high priest are going to be coming through Aaron. Through Aaron's, he's the first high priest, and then his son and his sons after that will be the high priest. So it's always, interesting to know between the difference between priests and Levites. So basically, they were all Levites, but the priests were from Aaron's family. And that also explains why genealogies are so important in the Bible. They have to prove, and that's how they prove they're qualified to become a priest, to become, to make sure they're in the tribe of Levi, to make sure they're in the family specifically of Aaron, if they're going to be a high priest. So, and we need to just remember that. It's kind of an interesting thing. So this is the beginning of the Mosaical dispensation. We're going to talk about that just a little bit more. So this is the beginning of the Mosaical dispensation. We've mentioned earlier, just want to remind everyone that there are 3 dispensations, and that just means 3 systems of worship. So far, there's been the patriarchal dispensation, and that's where God expects worship to be led by the fathers of families. He speaks to the fathers. The fathers are responsible for offering sacrifices. We studied about Adam and Cain and Abel offering those sacrifices right away. We studied about Noah. The first thing he did when he got off the ark was to get off the ark and offer a sacrifice. We read that there was some universal law that God had given people that he spoke to the fathers to obey and to teach their children, because it was passed down. We know that they had an understanding of animal sacrifices and sin. They had an understanding of clean and unclean animals. And The book of Job, which we've mentioned, took place in the patriarchal period before this law was given. He spoke of a moral code that he lived by. So evidently, and he offered sacrifices for his family. He understood some things about sin itself. And even on into the New Testament, there were people who followed God, who lived by a law and knew how to act and how to be, but they weren't in the Israelite family. So they would be considered to still be under that patriarchal system of worship. But this system now is going to be designed for the family of Israel, and we call it the Mosaical dispensation. It's going to have some similarities with sacrifices, but there's also different. And it's specifically for them, all kinds of laws that I mentioned, for them to be a government, for them to be, the civil laws and also the medicinal laws. And it's just designed to keep them holy and separate as a nation, because the distinction of this family more than the others, the family of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and so on, is that the Messiah will come through them. They may not fully understand it, but they know something special is going to happen through their family, that something in their family is going to bless the entire world. We know now, and I think they understood prophecy to some point, but probably not like we can see, that Christ was prophesied, from the beginning, that he was going to come and help us take care of sin in our lives. So I just want to, make sure we understand this idea of the Mosaical dispensation. It's going to last until the time that Christ dies on the cross. So from now on, as we read and study through the Old Testament and into the beginning of the New Testament, this is the style of worship that people are going to be using if they are in the Israelite or Jewish nation. And this is what Jesus was born, and this is how he is going to worship. So it's important for us to understand as we go forward that this is this type of worship that we'll be referring to for many, many weeks to come. Thank you. Join me next time as we learn about why this period is called the wandering period. And we're also going to talk a little bit about how we face giants and the importance of being able to face our giants.